Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a drafty old monastery perched on a mossy hillside, far away from any road you'd call modern. The sun has just dipped beneath the tree line, and the last light of day flickers across stone corridors lined with creaking doors and heavy wooden benches. You're here to explore something quiet, too quiet maybe, a world of ritual, repetition, and rustling. Yep, rustling, but not the leaves outside or the laundry of peasants flapping on a breeze. No, this is something more sinister, or at least it was to the monks who lived here. The unsettling, ever-present sound of parchment being turned inside cold, echoing stone libraries. You probably won't survive this timeline if you've got misophonia, just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this little sleepy history crew pop up from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice when you arrive at the Abbey gates, besides the faint smell of wax, wood smoke, and centuries-old moss, is the silence. Not the modern kind of silence filled with foam vibrations and ticking fridges, but an older, denser hush, the kind where even your heartbeat feels like a disruption. The monastery is home to about 20 monks, give or take the occasional visiting novice or penitent hermit. Their daily life is ruled by bells and books, and above all, the absence of idle noise. You're handed a robe, rough wool. No pockets. Pockets encourage lingering hands, and idle hands, as we all know, are the devil's knitting needles, or something like that. The monk who meets you at the gate doesn't speak. He nods, turns, and begins to walk. You follow through a narrow stone corridor that smells like ink and boiled cabbage. As you walk, your sandals scuff against the cold floor. One scuff too loud, and the monk ahead pauses slightly, just slightly. It's not a punishment, exactly. It's a reminder. Everything you do here echoes. By the time you reach the cloister, a stone garden square with a well in the center and soft vines creeping up the arches, you're already learning the rhythm. Step, pause, breathe. Everything has its beat. But the silence isn't complete. Somewhere faintly you hear it. Shh. Pause. Again, the unmistakable sound of vellum, dried animal skin, being turned by a careful, annoyed, possibly cursed hand. The scriptorium is tucked behind the chapel, lit by a narrow row of arrow-slit windows that let in just enough daylight to not ruin your eyes entirely. Inside, rows of desks are carved with grooves, not for ink, but for elbows. Monks sit here for 12 hours at a stretch, copying religious texts, not with joy, not really with devotion, with endurance. Here, in this vaulted chamber of holy reproduction, the great enemy lives, parchment. Most modern people don't realize this, but medieval parchment wasn't just noisy. It was expressive. The way it stretched, the way it fought you, the way it responded to humidity, it had a whole personality. And that personality was loud. Every time a monk reaches the end of a page in his massive hand-inked psalter, he has to perform what might as well be a minor exorcism. First, he rubs his fingers together. Oily fingertips grip better. Then, with reverent tension, he peels the stiff page upward. It resists. It crackles. Sometimes it lets out a sudden pop like a little fart of holy resistance. And then it falls back down with a dusty sigh, and all the other monks hear it. Some flinch. One glares. Another subtly scratches a tally mark under the desk for Brother Roderick's unnecessary rustling again. You find your own place at a desk. There's an open book of hours before you, copied in angular Gothic script. Your task? Just copy a sentence. Any sentence. You dip your stylus into the ink pot. The ink is black as sin and thick as stew. You hesitate, and then shh! You accidentally brush the edge of the page while repositioning your elbow. Instant silence. Even the birds outside take a beat. You swear Brother Roderick's left eye twitches. Later, during evening prayers, the abbot reads aloud from the Psalms. His voice is soft, melodic, paced for contemplation. Behind him, a young monk flips to the next page of the liturgical book. The abbot pauses. No rebuke, just a pause. The young monk gulps. You can tell he's counting how many penances this one-page turn will cost him. But it wasn't always like this. Histus, or an early noise management strategy? Nobody agrees. What we do know is that parchment, while considered holy, was incredibly unforgiving. Unlike paper, it had to be scraped smooth with a curved knife, soaked in lime water, and stretched over a frame for days. If it cracked or tore, you couldn't fix it. You just started over. And turning a page too fast, that could undo hours of labor. So it made sense that monks began to fear the sound. Not like a child fears thunder, but like a driver fears that one weird clicking sound their car makes right before something expensive happens. You hear it again that night as you try to fall asleep on your straw-filled mattress. A soft rustle somewhere down the corridor. Maybe someone studying late. Or maybe the wind just turned a page on its own. You pull your wool blanket up to your ears. It's going to be a long, quiet night. The next morning, before the sun rises fully over the abbey walls, the bell tower groans out a low, lingering chime. You stir beneath your rough blanket, still half wrapped in dreams of whispering pages and the occasional goat. No, not a dream. The parchment is made of goat, or calf, or sheep. It depends who lost the lottery that season. You rise in the dark, tugging on your robe and moving toward the chapel for matins, the first of 8 daily prayer sessions. It's cold. The kind of cold that makes your teeth complain and your joints gossip. You wonder briefly what monks did for central heating. The answer, it turns out, was nothing, or God, whichever came first. Inside the chapel, rows of sleepy monks kneel in unison. The only sounds are the soft clearing of throats, a suppressed sneeze, and the slow, deliberate turning of pages from the service book. The rustling is subtle, but it's there, like a papery creature moving just out of sight. You follow along, trying to make your own page turn as silent as a spider's breath. And yet, shock! Your page sticks just a little. You wince. Across the aisle, Brother Anselm narrows his eyes. You're not sure if it's disapproval or just the beginnings of monk myopia, but either way, the shame is real. After prayers, breakfast is served. Stale bread, watered-down ale, and a boiled egg. The hens were generous. No one speaks. You sit beside a young monk named Brother Jerome, who communicates with expressive eyebrow movements and one helpful elbow nudge toward the good bread basket. You make a mental note to stick near him. He clearly knows how to survive here. It's only after breakfast in the chapter house that you're introduced to the rule of Saint Benedict, written around the year 516 CE, is the foundational guide for monastic life in much of Europe. And by guide, we mean a 73-chapter legal and spiritual instruction manual for how not to make noise, have fun, or develop a personality. It covers everything from how to sleep, not too well, to how to walk softly, to how to speak, preferably not at all. The section everyone here knows by heart is Chapter 6, Restraint of Speech. You're invited to read it aloud. Ironic, but okay. Your voice wavers in the cold air. Let us do what the prophet saith. I said, I will take heed to my ways, that I sin not with my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle. I was dumb and was humbled and kept silence even from good things. Yikes. In other words, talk only when it's necessary, and even then, maybe think twice. Because silence isn't just polite in this world. It's holy. But silence isn't the same as stillness. The abbey is full of tiny movements, coughs, shuffles, and yes, those hated rustles. The rule didn't mention parchment directly, but you get the feeling it didn't have to. Everyone knows. Historians still debate whether monks were actually terrified of parchment sounds, or whether that's something we moderns are projecting onto them like nervous schoolchildren reading ghost stories. But there's evidence, in marginalia and letters, that monks did comment on how distracting, even impure, the noise could be. especially during services. To these men who believed that every moment of their day was meant to honor God, a noisy distraction was more than just annoying. It was a spiritual risk. A rustling page during prayer might break a brother's concentration. A loud page flip during scripture could scatter someone's internal discipline like leaves in wind. It's kind of like being in yoga class and someone's phone goes off. You know, if the phone was made of dead goats and rang every time you tried to read Romans 8. And so informal customs developed. Some monks would pre-rustle their pages ahead of time. Others learned to lift and glide the vellum with a sort of monkish sleight of hand. A few particularly devoted scribes began oiling their fingers or using soft cloths to muffle the sound, though that often left greasy thumbprints on the sacred text. The truly elite monks developed what was lovingly known as page discipline, an art form of muscle control and breath timing. They moved like parchment ninjas, flipping each leaf with monk-like grace and absolute silence. One of the more obscure records, a 13th century monastic training guide from the Rhineland, includes a side note. Let no page be turned hastily, lest the breath of the devil sneak in. Bit dramatic, but okay. And then there were the enforcers. Not officially, of course. There was no dean of Russell management, but every monastery had its own unofficial noise patrol. Elder monks who'd been there long enough to earn silent authority, who would glance or shift or gently cough in response to anything too loud. You meet one that afternoon, Brother Oswald. He's old, hunched, and eerily fast at appearing behind you when you so much as sneeze during study time. He says nothing. He simply places a hand on your shoulder and nods toward your open book. You swear he knows when you're about to rustle before you even move. You wonder, was he born this quiet? Or did the parchment train him? Outside, the world continues as usual. Carts rolling by, birds calling from the woods, villagers bickering about sheep. But inside these walls, sound is currency. And rustling? That's spiritual inflation. So when you return to your cell that night, your ears are sharper. Every creak of the bed frame, every flap of your sleeve seems magnified. You lie down carefully, wrapping yourself in the blanket as though it were made of stained glass. The candle flickers low, and just as you're drifting off, shh, from the hallway, again, you sigh. The war against noise isn't over, and tomorrow you'll learn just how loud a silent book can really be. You wake to the faint gray light slipping through the narrow window of your cell, the stone cold against your cheek, the blanket heavy with the chill of the night. As you stretch, your fingers brush the rough edge of your writing desk, where a small stack of parchment waits, ready for the day's copying. And here's the rub. Each of those pages is a noise bomb wrapped in sacred text. Parchment, that humble skin of sheep or goat, is not just a medium, it's practically a living entity. You soon realize that turning a single page is no casual flip. It's an event, a battle, a negotiation. Unlike modern paper, which lies flat and predictable, parchment is stiff and springy. It can warp with moisture, curl at the edges, and snap back with a surprising force. The monks often compared it to the wild beast beneath the quill, something that resisted domestication despite their best efforts. The process of making parchment was itself an ordeal. The raw animal skin had to be soaked in lime water for days, which loosened the hair but also stiffened the hide. Then it was stretched tightly over a wooden frame and scraped with a curved knife until smooth enough for writing. Even after all this, the resulting sheet had quirks, thin spots, bumps, and a texture that changed with the weather. And that texture meant sound. Every time a page turned, the friction between the fingers and the vellum created a dry, crackling rustle. Sometimes it was like the whisper of dried leaves, other times a sharp snap. You imagine this sound ricocheting in the stone walls of the scriptorium, turning silence into a near physical presence. The monks had to develop special techniques to manage this menace. One popular method was to bend and glide the page slowly, coaxing it to turn without snapping. It required practiced fingers and a sort of patience you'd hope to find in a saint or a tortoise. But the worst was when humidity spiked. Parchment absorbs moisture like a sponge, and suddenly the pages would stick together or become limp and flappy. One false move, and a page would peel away with a loud, sharp tearing noise. This was an audible nightmare for monks sworn to silence. Interestingly, historians still argue whether the monks' fear of parchment noise was purely practical or layered with symbolic meaning. Was the rustling seen as a distraction, a threat, or perhaps even a kind of spiritual impurity? One theory is that the sound represented the impermanence of the material world, an audible reminder that even holy texts were bound to decay and rustle away like leaves in the wind. Another suggestion is that the noise symbolized the restless soul, always seeking distraction from contemplation. Whatever the case, the monk's response was consistent. Silence must be preserved at all costs. You remember an old manuscript margin where a scribe doodled a small goat with the caption, "My enemy, my parchment." It's oddly comforting to know these monks had a sense of humor about their plight. You try to mimic their technique, practicing the lift and slide on your own sheet. Your fingers tremble with concentration. The first attempt produces a small snap, and you wince. Brother Oswald, always lurking, gives a brief nod, half approval, half warning. You notice that the room itself seems to conspire with the noise. The vaulted ceilings bounce sound unpredictably. A single page turn can echo down the hall, disturbing monks several rooms away. Once, a scribe's loud page turn reportedly caused a novice to drop his quill in surprise, leading to a cascade of whispered admonishments. You also learn that the monasteries had developed soft furnishings, woolen cloths and leather pads, to muffle the sound. Some scribes kept these tucked under their wrists or used them to cover pages as they worked, creating a muffled, almost ritualistic rustling. One particularly inventive monk, Brother Theophilus, is credited with inventing page weights, small lid strips designed to hold down parchment edges. While effective, the clinking of metal introduced a new set of sound challenges, which only fueled the lore around the elusive quest for silence. Despite all these efforts, accidents happened. A sudden gust of wind, an overzealous page turn, or a distracted brother could set off a chain reaction of rustling. The noise would seem to multiply, filling the scriptorium like a swarm of dry leaves caught in an autumn breeze. You try to imagine the patience required to work here day after day, surrounded by this constant reminder of imperfection. Yet there was something oddly soothing about it, too. The steady rhythm of pages turning, the careful, deliberate gestures, all part of a slow dance between man and material. The parchment was both obstacle and companion, a persistent presence in a life otherwise ruled by strict routines and prayers. And if you listen closely, you realize that even in the silence, the monks weren't alone. The parchment was speaking too, in its own creaks and whispers, a quiet chorus of the past. As the sun climbs higher, you find yourself in the scriptorium, that sanctified chamber where the monk's daily ritual of copying manuscripts unfolds. It smells faintly of ink, beeswax candles, and the ever-present musk of aged parchment. The room is long and narrow, lined with wooden desks carved with grooves and ink stains that tell stories of centuries past. You settle at your station, a simple table with a quill, ink pot, and a freshly stretched sheet of vellum. The scriptorium is a study in contrasts, peaceful yet bustling, silent yet full of subtle sounds. The soft scratch of quills on parchment, the occasional cough, the careful turning of pages, all create a low, comforting hum, like a gentle rain on a quiet afternoon. You recall that the role of the scriptorium was crucial in preserving knowledge through the Middle Ages. These rooms were the libraries and universities of their day, the place where sacred texts and classical works were painstakingly reproduced. The monks, often working in near monastic silence, were guardians of history. But here's the catch. They weren't just copying text. They were also copying errors, marginal notes, and even doodles. The human factor meant that no manuscript was ever quite the same. You pick up your quill, the nib sharp but fragile. The ink is a deep black made from oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic, a concoction that stains fingers and clothes alike. Each letter you write is a meditation, a slow act of devotion. And then the inevitable happens. You reach for the next page in the manuscript you're copying from, and the parchment resists. The edges curl like stubborn leaves, and as you lift, the sound is unmistakable, a crisp, dry rustle that echoes in the stillness. You cringe. A few monks glance up, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. The rustling sound seems louder in this silence, a loudspeaker amplifying your minor transgression. It's here you learn about the scriptorium etiquette. While the rule of Saint Benedict demanded silence, the scriptorium's unofficial laws were even more exacting. Noise was the enemy, especially the rustling of pages. Some monks whispered that the devil himself delighted in any break of silence, using the noise to distract and tempt. To counteract this, monks developed clever tricks. Some would soften their fingertips with oils or cloths to reduce the friction. Others memorized entire passages to minimize page turns, reciting from memory while their fingers rested on the desk. You hear about Brother Martin, who reportedly mastered the art of silent page turning so well that he earned the nickname the Whisperer. He was said to flip through entire manuscripts without making a sound, a skill akin to sleight of hand. However, mastering this art was no simple feat. Parchment is unpredictable. Moisture, temperature, and age all conspire to make it either too sticky or too brittle. One wrong move, and you risked a loud snap or even tearing the precious document. This fragility made every page turn a small moment of suspense. In fact, some monasteries placed rules about handling texts, forbidding novices from touching manuscripts without supervision. You imagine the pressure. One careless rustle could disrupt the entire room's concentration, drawing whispered reproaches or a stern look from the abbot. The noise wasn't just about etiquette, it had practical consequences. Loud rustling during prayers or reading could break the spiritual focus, considered crucial for effective worship and study. Historians still argue whether this intense aversion to noise was mainly spiritual or partly a way to protect fragile manuscripts from damage. One curious detail you uncover is that some monks developed a sort of parchment paranoia, becoming hyper-aware of any sound, sometimes leading to whispered warnings about rustle demons or page ghosts lurking in the scriptorium. You smile at the thought. Even in the quietest of places, a little superstition always finds a home. As the day wears on, you join in the delicate dance of writing, erasing, and turning pages. The parchment's rustling is an ever-present companion, a reminder that even in silence, history speaks softly. The afternoon sun begins to wane, casting long, slanting shadows across the stone floors of the abbey. You feel the weariness creeping in, the kind that settles in your bones after hours bent over manuscript pages, fingers stained with ink and stiff from holding quills. The scriptorium quiets as monks finish their copying, their rustling pages finally settling into a hush. It's then that you're introduced to a surprising ally in the quest for silence, the humble writing desk itself. Monastic furniture wasn't just functional, it was designed with a precise awareness of noise and movement. Desks were built with thick, heavy wood to dampen the clatter of quills and the shuffle of parchment. Some featured angled surfaces so that pages could rest naturally, reducing the need for fiddly handling. You touch the surface of your desk, noticing the smooth, worn grain beneath your fingertips, polished over centuries of use. You realize this was no ordinary table. It was a carefully crafted instrument in the fight against noise. Interestingly, some desks had small recesses or grooves where monks would rest their ink pots or quills, designed to prevent accidental spills that would cause both mess and commotion. But the most intriguing feature is the parchment guard, a soft strip of leather or cloth affixed to the desk edge, intended to cushion the movement of pages and minimize rustling. You wonder if anyone ever invented a page-turning glove to further muffle sound, but historical records on such gadgets are frustratingly silent. Beyond furniture, the monks also used ritual and timing to keep noise in check. For example, during certain prayers or readings, page turns were minimized or even avoided altogether. The community might chant or meditate without texts, relying on memory and repetition. This rhythm of silent and spoken word gave the day a gentle ebb and flow, like breathing. At the same time, some monks employed sound camouflage tactics, covering loud parchment with the scratching of quills, or coordinating page turns so they overlapped, creating a kind of rustling chorus that made individual noise less noticeable. You chuckle at the idea, a secret symphony of silent readers, all conspiring against the tyranny of the loud page. However, not all noise management was so serene. Occasionally, frustration flared. Monks might slam books shut in exasperation, or grumble quietly about particularly noisy parchments. A manuscript with pages that crackled like dry leaves was sometimes dubbed a rustle beast, a nickname that spread like wildfire. You learn that this animosity toward noisy parchment sometimes bled into monastic lore. Stories circulated about manuscripts cursed to rustle uncontrollably, or pages that would snap shut by unseen forces. Historians still debate how much of these tales were metaphorical, and how much reflected genuine anxieties about the physical limitations of parchment. You're reminded of a peculiar marginal note in an old manuscript. Beware the book that speaks too loud. It may wake the dead. You wonder if, in a way, the monk's obsession with silence was also a way to control fear. Fear of distraction, imperfection, and the unpredictable world beyond the abbey walls. As evening falls, the soft rustling in the scriptorium slows to a trickle. You close your own manuscript carefully, hearing the faintest whisper as the page settles. Outside, the night is calm, and the monastery prepares for rest. But inside, the memory of those rustling pages lingers, a reminder that even in silence, the past has its own voice. Night deepens and the monastery grows quieter. The only sounds now the occasional distant hoot of an owl or the gentle drip of water from the eaves. Yet within the scriptorium, the monk's work isn't always done. Some linger, guided by candlelight and a deep sense of duty, finishing texts that must be ready for morning prayers. But working by candlelight introduces a new set of challenges, especially when handling those ever-troublesome parchment pages. The flickering flames create shadows that dance unpredictably across the manuscript. Your eyes strain to catch every letter, and your hands become more cautious. Every page turn risks not just noise, but also the danger of catching the edge of a flame or spilling precious ink. Candles themselves were notoriously smoky and unreliable. The beeswax candles favored by monasteries were expensive and burned unevenly. Sometimes, the smoke would cause pages to yellow or curl, making that parchment even more obstinate. You learn that monks developed a variety of techniques to minimize these risks. Some used glass lanterns to shield the candle's flame from drafts, creating a steadier light and reducing smoke exposure. Others preferred oil lamps, which burned cleaner but were more challenging to maintain. Still, despite all precautions, working late had its hazards. One misstep could mean singed edges or worse, fire. The great libraries of the Middle Ages knew the devastation a single spark could cause. Historians debate how seriously monks feared nighttime work compared to the risks of rustling parchment during the day. Some argue the quiet night hours heightened the tension around every sound and movement, amplifying the sense of fragility in the manuscripts. You imagine a weary monk, fingers trembling slightly, turning a page with painstaking care under the low light. A sudden gust of air causes the candle to flicker wildly, and the page flutters audibly, breaking the silence with a crackle that feels almost like a shout in the stillness. Despite the dangers, nighttime copying held a certain sacred allure. The quiet hours felt closer to the divine, a time when the world's distractions faded, leaving only the whispered communion between scribe, text, and faith. You recall stories of monks who believed that working in the stillness of night brought them closer to God's presence, their fingers tracing ancient letters that connected heaven and earth. This mystical view of nighttime work created a kind of paradox. While monks dreaded the disruptive rustle of parchment, they embraced the solitude and focus that those very pages demanded. One fascinating tidbit is that some monasteries kept special night scripts, texts written or copied only during these late hours, imbued with the quiet reverence of nocturnal labor. These manuscripts often featured delicate illuminations and flourishes, perhaps inspired by the soft candlelight and the hushed ambience. You wonder if, in these moments, the rustling parchment was less an annoyance and more a whispered prayer, a gentle reminder of the human effort behind every sacred word. As your own candle guttered and the night deepened, you fold away your quill, the faint rustling of parchment now a lullaby. Morning comes again, and with it the gentle chorus of birds outside the monastery walls. Inside, the monks begin their day anew, settling once more into the delicate balance of devotion and labor. But today, you're introduced to an unexpected challenge, the impact of weather on parchment and its notorious rustling. Parchment, made from animal skins, is highly sensitive to changes in humidity and temperature. When the air is dry, it tightens and stiffens, making pages prone to snapping loudly when turned. On damp or humid days, it softens and becomes limp, causing pages to stick together with a reluctant rustle that can be just as disruptive. You imagine the frustrations of a monk on a rainy day, struggling to keep manuscripts usable as moisture creeps into stone abbey walls. Some monasteries try to regulate the environment, hanging tapestries or using small fires to control humidity, but these measures were only partly effective. Interestingly, you discover that some scribes developed elaborate rituals to season their parchment before writing, gently warming and flexing the pages to reduce stiffness and noise. One monk reportedly carried a small pouch of dried lavender, not just for fragrance, but because the scent was believed to help parchments settle and resist the cling of moisture. Historians still debate whether these rituals had practical merit or were largely symbolic acts of care and respect toward the manuscripts. You also learn about the ingenious storage solutions monasteries used. Manuscripts were kept in wooden cupboards or chests lined with soft cloths to buffer against environmental shifts. Some monks even rotated their books regularly to prevent uneven warping. Despite all these precautions, the battle with weather continued. You imagine the delicate frustration of turning a stubborn page that resists, rustling like dry leaves in the wind. The rustling, you realize, was a constant companion, reflecting not just the physical state of the parchment, but the rhythms of the natural world outside. It's a reminder that these monks lived very much in tune with the seasons, the weather, and the materiality of their tools, far from the digital world we inhabit today. You smile at the thought that centuries ago, a sudden breeze or a drop in humidity could turn a quiet day into a symphony of parchment sounds. And yet these monks persevered, treating their noisy parchments not as nuisances, but as part of the sacred labor of preservation. One last quirky detail. Some manuscripts include marginal notes warning future readers about wet days and urging caution when turning pages, a practical bit of advice from one careful hand to another. You close your eyes briefly and picture the monastery enveloped in mist, the faint rustling of pages mingling with the soft patter of rain. It's a soothing, imperfect harmony, a reminder that even in silence, history is alive and breathing. The late morning sun filters through narrow stained glass windows, casting soft colors on the worn stone floors of the monastery. You settle back at your desk, feeling a bit more confident in your page-turning skills, though the parchment still has its tricks. Today's lesson is about the unusual art of manuscript repair and its surprising impact on the soundscape of the scriptorium. You discover that medieval manuscripts were expensive, precious, and constantly used, and inevitably damaged. Tears, holes, and worn edges were common problems that needed fixing before the text became unreadable. Monks employed a range of repair techniques, from patching tears with tiny pieces of vellum to reinforcing fragile edges with a thin strip of parchment glued in place. The glue, often made from animal collagen or plant-based substances, was surprisingly strong yet flexible. These repairs not only saved manuscripts, but also introduced new textures and sounds. A patched page rustled differently, a bit stiffer or softer, adding variety to the scriptorium's quiet chorus. You find yourself fascinated by the delicate balance monks had to strike. Repairing a page too heavily could make it stiff and noisy, while a too light fix risked further damage. Sometimes these repairs were visible to readers, marked by faint lines or carefully inscribed notes about the patchwork, almost like an ancient form of bookbinding commentary. Historians still debate how much these repair marks reveal about the manuscript's history or the monks' attitudes toward their work. A quirky story catches your eye. One monk, apparently frustrated by a perpetually noisy patched page, allegedly exorcised the manuscript with prayers and holy water, hoping to quiet its rustle. You chuckle at the idea of a haunted book, cursed not by demons, but by its own fragile repairs. In some cases, repaired manuscripts were considered more valuable precisely because their scars told stories of survival and care. You think about how modern book collectors treasure signs of age and use, appreciating the tactile history embedded in every crease and patch. As you turn a carefully repaired page yourself, you notice the subtle difference in sound, a gentle crackle instead of a sharp rustle. It's a reminder that even in imperfection, there is beauty and rhythm. The scriptorium, you realize, was not a place of sterile silence, but a living space where the sounds of age and effort blended into a soothing background hum. You imagine the monks, patient and attentive, listening to the music of their own making, a quiet symphony of history in the making. As the afternoon light fades, you set aside your quill, the repaired manuscripts whispering softly in the growing dusk. The late afternoon light drapes gently across the scriptorium, the golden glow softening the edges of the ancient manuscript spread before you. As you prepare to continue, you become aware of a surprising element in the monks' quest for quiet, the variety of writing tools they wielded, and how those tools influenced the rustling sounds of parchment. Quills, made from the feathers of geese, swans, or crows, were the primary writing instruments. They were carefully crafted, trimmed and hardened with heat, and sometimes even sandpaper-like materials to ensure a smooth flow of ink. Yet the quill's sharp point and the rhythm of scratching across parchment produced its own soundtrack, a gentle scratch that mingled with the rustling pages. Interestingly, you learn that scribes sometimes varied their quill style depending on the type of parchment. A thicker quill might glide silently on smoother vellum, but create louder scratching on rougher pages. Ink itself added complexity. Made from oak gall, iron salts, and other natural ingredients, medieval ink could sometimes cause parchment to stiffen and crackle as it dried, creating little noises that monks grew accustomed to over long hours. There were also writing knives, small, sharp blades used to scrape away mistakes and smooth parchment surfaces. The occasional scrape of a knife, followed by the quiet flick of a flicked scrap, contributed to the monastery's unique soundscape. You imagine a monk pausing mid-sentence, scraping a blotch away, while pages whisper softly in the background. Scholars debate how much monks consciously balance these sounds to create a calming atmosphere. Was the scriptorium a place designed for focus through quiet, or did the combination of sounds serve as a kind of white noise, helping monks concentrate? A curious detail emerges. Some monasteries encouraged monks to develop a personal writing rhythm, a steady tempo of scratching and page turning that resembled a meditative chant. You picture monks quietly humming their own writing songs, their quills tapping a gentle beat in time with turning pages. On a lighter note, you find a marginal joke tucked into one manuscript, a doodle of a quill complaining about the noisy parchment it had to write on, humorously blaming the pages for the overall racket. You smile, imagining that even in these solemn settings, monks had moments of playful camaraderie with their materials. As evening approaches, the quill slows, the rustling fades, and the scriptorium settles into a peaceful hush. You close your own manuscript with a satisfied sigh, the familiar symphony of scratching and rustling slowly quieting down. As twilight deepens, the flicker of candlelight becomes the scriptorium's sole companion, casting long shadows that stretch like silent sentinels over rows of manuscripts. Tonight, your focus shifts to the sensory world beyond sound, the tactile experience of handling parchment, and how this quiet sensation shaped the monk's relationship with their work. You run your fingers over the surface of a freshly prepared parchment page, noting its subtle graininess, the coolness beneath your touch, and the slight give of the stretched skin. This texture was unique to each manuscript, shaped by the animal, preparation methods, and even the environment where it was made. Monks developed a profound sensitivity to these tactile cues. The feel of a page could reveal its condition, its age, or even the quality of the ink. Interestingly, some monks preferred manuscripts with a particular hand feel. A soft, supple parchment was considered ideal for long reading sessions, while stiffer pages were favored for their durability. You imagine a monk turning each page delicately, almost reverently, as if each touch connected him to the centuries of history embedded in the material. Historians still debate how much this tactile awareness influenced the design and use of manuscripts, but it's clear that the sensory experience was integral to monastic scholarship. The monks also used gloves made from soft fabric when handling especially delicate pages, a practice that reduced oils from skin damaging the parchment, and interestingly, also muffled the sounds of turning pages even further. You picture a gentle rustle, barely audible, as pages slide softly beneath fabric-covered fingers, almost a whisper of history passing through time. There's a quaint note in a 12th century manuscript instructing readers to handle with care, for these leaves carry the breath of saints. The poetic phrasing suggests the sacred connection monks felt toward their texts. This tactile respect extended to the tools as well. Quills were carefully maintained and often stored wrapped in soft cloths to preserve their delicate tips. You find it fascinating that monks' attention to the feel of materials created an unspoken language, a silent dialogue between hand, tool, and text. As you gently close a manuscript, the tactile comfort of that moment lingers, a soothing reminder of the intimate bond between monk and parchment. The rustling noise fades into the background, replaced by the quiet rhythm of touch, a subtle lullaby for a weary mind. Night deepens further, and the cool air seeps through the monastery's thick stone walls, bringing with it the faint scent of candle wax and old wood. As you settle into the rhythm of the scriptorium, it's time to explore a curious tradition, the practice of silencing manuscripts to minimize their rustling, and the surprising rituals that accompany this quieting effort. You learn that monks sometimes applied a thin layer of special wax or resin to parchment pages to reduce friction and noise. This process, delicate and painstaking, could soften the texture and make pages glide more smoothly under the fingers. This wax was often made from beeswax mixed with fragrant oils, creating a subtle aroma that lingered faintly in the scriptorium air. The smell was calming, almost like an early form of aromatherapy, soothing monks during long copying sessions. However, waxing a manuscript wasn't without controversy. Some scribes worried it might damage the text or alter the parchment's natural properties. Historians debate whether these treatments were widely practiced or reserved for only the most precious manuscripts. In some cases, the waxing process was accompanied by quiet prayers or chants, invoking divine blessing for the sacred task of preserving knowledge. One fascinating detail: a few monasteries kept recipe books for parchment treatments, listing ingredients and instructions that sound surprisingly like early cosmetic or craft manuals. You imagine monks carefully brushing melted beeswax onto pages, the faint crackle of the cooling wax blending with the parchment's rustle, a tactile, olfactory symphony. There's even a tale of a particularly meticulous monk who would wax each page twice, believing it enhanced both the manuscript's longevity and its silent dignity. The idea of a silent manuscript feels almost paradoxical. How do you preserve the delicate balance between durability and the soothing quiet needed for focus? You picture the monk's satisfaction as a freshly waxed page slides almost silently, a rare and treasured moment of peace in a world filled with distracting sounds. And yet, the ritual of waxing was as much about care and reverence as it was about noise control. As your own fingers glide over a waxed page, the familiar rustle is softened, almost transformed into a gentle sigh. You imagine this quiet sigh floating through the monastery halls as night deepens, wrapping the monks in a cocoon of calm and devotion. The monastery is cloaked in the deep silence of night, save for the gentle flicker of candle flames and the barely audible rustle of parchment turning. Tonight, your journey brings you to the curious role of sound in monastic discipline and meditation, where even the softest noises, including the rustling of pages, held surprising significance. Monks lived by a strict daily schedule, punctuated by prayer, work, and study, with silence often mandated during certain hours. Yet silence wasn't absolute. It was a practiced state, a form of mindful awareness that involved noticing every subtle sound, including the quiet swish of parchment. Some orders used the sound of parchment turning as a kind of meditation aid. The gentle rustling was thought to help monks maintain focus, anchoring their attention to the present moment as they read or copy texts. You learn that certain monasteries implemented silent reading hours, during which any loud noises were discouraged, but the soft turning of pages was embraced as a peaceful companion to contemplation. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were, with some arguing they were confined to specific orders known for their strict discipline, while others believed the approach was more universal. An intriguing fringe tidbit: some monks trained themselves to turn pages with a near imperceptible rustle, mastering a skill that combined patience, precision, and a touch of theatricality. This quiet page turning was even taught as part of monastic training, emphasizing humility and respect for the sacred texts. You imagine a novice monk, fingers poised delicately, practicing the perfect turn over and over in the dim light, each movement a whispered prayer. In a lighter vein, you discover occasional playful notes in margins, where monks teased each other about noisy page turners or exaggerated the sound for comic effect. Despite the solemnity of monastic life, moments of humor and camaraderie found their way into these quiet spaces. This balance between discipline and lightness created a unique acoustic environment where every sound, even a soft rustle, was part of the spiritual experience. As you lean back, the gentle rustling seems less an intrusion and more a soft hymn, a reminder that even in silence, history breathes. The rustle becomes a lullaby, gently coaxing your mind toward rest and reflection. Outside, the moon casts a pale glow through narrow windows, and inside the monastery, the soft chorus of rustling parchment carries on like a gentle breeze. As you continue, you discover the fascinating ways monks adapted their workspaces to manage sound and create an atmosphere of calm. Monasteries were often designed with acoustics in mind. Thick stone walls and heavy wooden doors help muffle noises from outside, creating a sanctuary where internal sounds like parchment rustling became a subtle soundtrack rather than a distraction. You learn that some scriptoria featured wooden desks with felt or cloth coverings to soften the impact of quills and reduce page noise. Others installed small cushions on benches, encouraging gentle movements that didn't disturb the fragile silence. Interestingly, the arrangement of manuscripts also influenced sound. Books were stored on shelves lined with fabric or straw, materials that absorbed sound and prevented the sharp clatter of shifting books. Historians still debate the extent to which these architectural choices were deliberate acoustic strategies or simply practical solutions for preservation and comfort. You imagine the care taken in building these quiet spaces, where every material and layout choice contributed to a harmonious environment. There's a charming anecdote about a monastery where the abbot ordered all noisy tasks, including heavy page turning, to be done in a separate chamber to maintain the tranquility of the main scriptorium. You smile thinking about monks tiptoeing between rooms, clutching their manuscripts as if carrying fragile secrets. Another quirky detail: some monks reportedly used soft leather finger stalls not only to protect parchment, but to mute the sound of turning pages, a practice that sounds surprisingly modern. The combination of architectural design and practical adaptations reveals the monks' deep commitment to cultivating peace through sound control. As you imagine sitting in such a space, the gentle rustling blends seamlessly into the quiet hum of candlelight and distant chants. This carefully crafted stillness invites you to slow down, breathe deeply, and lose yourself in the soothing rhythms of ancient pages. The monastery's calm is a timeless lullaby, echoing softly through stone and parchment alike. The quiet hours stretch late into the night, and you find yourself drawn to the rituals surrounding the care and cleaning of manuscripts, rituals that were as much about sound as they were about preservation. You learn that monks use soft brushes made from animal hair to gently dust pages, removing tiny particles that could scratch or degrade the parchment over time. This brushing produced a barely there whisper, part of the scriptorium's gentle symphony. Interestingly, some monasteries incorporated the sound of cleaning into their daily rhythm, marking transitions between study periods and moments of rest. Historians debate whether this practice was symbolic, cleansing the physical text as a metaphor for spiritual purity, or purely practical. You imagine the tender care taken with each manuscript, brushing away centuries of dust with mindful hands, the soft rustle of bristles echoing like a lullaby. There was also a practice of airing manuscripts, laying them flat in dry, warm rooms to breathe. The quiet flip of pages in these moments added to the scriptorium's ambient sounds. A quirky tale tells of a monk who, frustrated by persistent dust, created a makeshift vacuum by blowing gently through a hollow reed, amusingly dubbed the wind of knowledge. You laugh softly, picturing this improvised tool and the gentle puff of air carrying away dust, and perhaps some prayers too. Monks took great pride in maintaining their manuscripts, believing that cleanliness honored both the physical book and the divine wisdom within. You think about how these quiet rituals contributed to the monks' mindfulness, their work a meditation in sound and touch. As you listen to the soft brushing and turning of pages, the scriptorium becomes a sanctuary of delicate noise, each sound a thread woven into the fabric of history. The gentle care, the whispered movement of hands and pages, all invite you to relax deeper, the rustling fading into a soothing cadence. You feel a comforting closeness to those ancient caretakers, their quiet devotion echoing softly through time. The first light of dawn creeps softly through the monastery windows, bathing the scriptorium in a pale, calming glow. As you prepare to close this quiet journey, you reflect on the enduring legacy of those gentle sounds, the rustling parchment, the scratching quills, the whispered prayers that shaped a world of learning and devotion. You realize the monk's fear of rustling parchment was not a simple dislike of noise, but a deep respect for the sacred silence needed to focus, meditate, and connect with the divine. You recall how every sound was woven into their daily lives, from the soft scratch of quills, the careful turning of pages, to the faint scent of wax and ink, a rich sensory tapestry that modern ears might overlook. Historians still argue whether the monk's obsession with silence and sound was born from practical necessity, spiritual discipline, or a bit of both. Whatever the truth, the result was a unique acoustic world that offered calm, focus, and a sense of reverence. You imagine the monks sitting in candlelight, their work a quiet conversation across centuries, their rustling pages carrying wisdom in a gentle rhythm. As you close your eyes, you hear again the soft rustle of parchment, a sound that once sparked fear, now transformed into a lullaby for the soul. Remember the care, the subtle rituals, and even the playful moments hidden in margins. These details bring the scriptorium to life, not as a place of fear, but of gentle dedication. Let this quiet symphony ease your thoughts, slow your breath, and invite peaceful rest. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let the soft whispers of history guide you to sleep. Wind down. The night settles deeper, wrapping you in a gentle embrace. The faintest whisper of parchment rustling drifts like a soft breeze through a quiet forest, steady and calming. Let your breath slow and your mind soften as these ancient sounds become a lullaby, carrying you away from the day's cares. Imagine yourself sitting among those monks, surrounded by stone walls and flickering candles, their silent devotion a peaceful balm. No rush, no noise, but the gentle turning of pages, each movement a reminder that even in stillness, there is life and learning. Feel your muscles relax, your heartbeat slow, and your thoughts drift like leaves on a gentle stream. The sacred silence of the monastery wraps around you, inviting rest and renewal. Let the quiet rustle be your guide into dreams, where history's soft secrets unfold like a whispered story told just for you. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.